Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Finish More Music podcast. Super excited to be bringing to you none other than Rodriguez Jr., a man who not only has a who's who list of releases on the world's best underground dance music labels, 20 plus years in the industry, but is also one of the unquestionably standout performers that we have in the scene as well. So I'm incredibly excited to discover more about the performance, the creative process, how all the flow works. So let's get stuck in. First of all, Olivier, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Hey, hello. Thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to be talking with you now, and yeah, very happy to talk about creativity and music.
Yeah, fantastic. So one of the things I read, and maybe this is going to be true or not, but that you have a 10-hour schedule in the studio. Is that right?
Yeah, that was true. It has slightly changed since we got a baby in last past July. But yeah, I spend a lot of time in the studio, and it's probably one of the most important thing for me. Whatever happen, even if it's a nice day and I want to walk around and I want to meet friends and all that stuff, going to the studio is a commitment. It's like a day job. So whatever happen, 9 a.m. I show up in the studio with my coffee and I start working. It's very important. It's also probably part of my general balance. It's very important to be here, whatever happen.
Yeah. So when you are doing the long days, let's say you used to do the 10-hour studio days, but even if you're doing that now, what's the secret to maintaining the energy and the bandwidth and the creativity for that length of time? Because a lot of people I speak to, certainly couldn't do 10 hours.
Yeah, I think the most important is to avoid putting any kind of pressure. Of course, if I show up in the studio trying to finalize something, I'm gonna have to face a block at some point. So I just try to basically to hang out here, and sometimes I don't even produce music. I just play on a keyboard. I just read a manual. I just clean my space, or sort samples, do very basic maintenance tasks, and it helps me to wait for the moment when the inspiration will show up and and start the actual creative process. So yeah, it's just avoiding this pressure. Yeah, I must provide something. I must do something right now. And
Okay, cool. So I'd
yeah,
love to touch on this as we
yeah,
go forward. This idea of pressure.
yeah.
Before we get there, though, you mentioned when you're ready to start the creative process. What's the feeling? What's happening in you that you feel right now? Now it's time to put, whatever it might be, start a song, for example.
It's a vision. It's just like a sparkle. You're having fun with the scenes, for instance, and you're like, oh wow, that could be a very good base for a story. I think that as music producers, whatever we do, whatever kind of music, we are all trying to tell stories. Even if it's pure techno music, there is always a story behind that you're trying to tell with your sounds and the structure of the track and all that stuff. So yeah, at some point there is this sparkle, like can be a groove, it can be a sound, sometimes it can be a few chords, and you're like, oh wow, it's vibration. You just want to build up something from this bass.
Yeah.
So yeah, just it's all about waiting for this sparkle without looking for it. If you start looking for it, it will never show up probably.
Right, so you're definitely not forcing it. You're going, and so I'm imagining, because obviously in your live performances, you're improvising and doing all of these things. Is that your approach typically in the studio, or do you sometimes come in the studio and you've already got the idea of what you want to do before you sit down and get started?
It happens sometimes, yeah. It happens sometimes. Actually, it used to happen a lot when I was traveling for performing. because during all those travels, waiting lines, all that stuff, I was constantly collecting IDs on my smartphone or on my laptop computer. And of course, I would hit the studio with already a bunch of ideas and things that I can develop. But yeah, it all depends. It all depends. Like recently, of course, without traveling, it's more difficult to show up in the studio with something already in mind and like a preconceived idea. It's more difficult.
And so that's when you're in just jamming and improvising, something catches your sort of interest, and then you're like, okay, I want to tell a story with this.
Yeah.
The improvising when you're performing is, it's super cool. I love it. I said to you just before we started, I think it's absolutely fantastic. What is it that drew you to that way of performing? Because there aren't very many people in our scene. I mean, a lot of people, great producers, are DJs, and that's super cool. I used to DJ, absolutely love it. But you bring, all of the improvisation, different bits of gear. What was it that got you inspired to want to perform like that?
Basically, it's how I started performing in the 90s. I have a musician background. I learned how to play the piano since the age of 6, and eventually I performed in rock and roll bands and stuff in the 90s, and then I discovered electronic music. And yeah, basically it was the only way for me to perform in those early parties in south of France, raves. And I would bring my a few keyboards and my huge computer and a mixer, all that stuff. And that's how I started to perform, and it was so exciting, so fresh. And I was one of the only ones in south of France doing this kind of stuff. So it definitely helped me to stand out among all of those DJs.
I mean, one of the things that I think is fascinating and I'm really curious about is, so for anyone who hasn't seen, you want to jump onto YouTube and check out Rodriguez Jr. Live Jam, I think is the thing to search into YouTube. So there's some videos of you, some on your own. There's one with Lizette as well. And you're literally like jamming for X number of minutes, 3 or 4 tracks. And for me, I normally find that the music is awesome. And if I see someone performing it, yeah, it might add a little bit of something. But when I watch you, it's like you're much more immersed. So I could sit here doing something kind of mundane, like my emails, listening to the jam, like really happily. But if I was to have a coffee and actually watch you doing it, and like it's so fluid, it sort of takes the experience up. The way that I would describe it is it feels like, or it looks like, your tools are an extension of you. So rather than you playing the music, you are the music. And that's maybe a slightly abstract way of talking about it. Is that your experience of being in that moment, actually just jamming out as well?
That's a very interesting point you're bringing now, because for me, practicing is very important. This is why I practice so much, because when I'm performing, when I'm jamming, I don't want to think about what I'm doing, and that's something I always talk about when I'm doing workshops and masterclasses. When you show up in front of a crowd or in front of a camera for a performance, you shouldn't be thinking about what you're doing. It's like driving. When you drive a car, you don't think about what you're doing with the brake and all that stuff. You just do it. And I think it's very important to reach the same level when performing with electronic music instrument, or with an instrument generally. With a guitar, you're not thinking about what you're gonna do with your fingers. You just do it. And that's very important. And this is why practicing is so important. In the end, we are using electronic instruments, but it's the same that when performing violin or piano. You must constantly be practicing and forget about the technique.
That's quite interesting. You mentioned the car, which is obviously a lot more simple to drive overall, easier to learn. You're there with a synth over here and a drum machine over there, some controllers. I've seen your live setup. You had like the iPad on there as well, a DJ mixer. How long did it take you to become this proficient where you don't have to think about it anymore?
Oh, I don't know. It's like, in the early in the early 2000, people used to call me the octopus already. So, so probably it took me like a few years, I don't know, like 4 or 5 years, to be constantly practicing in the studio. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to quantify, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning when trying new devices and new softwares. So it's probably a never-ending process too.
Yes, you mentioned actually that your live setup is constantly evolving, I think were the words that I saw you say in another interview. So I guess therein is something that's really interesting, is how do you create that balance? Because if a new piece of equipment or something else comes in, that has to be practiced and learned. What's the process of deciding, yes, something new's coming in to the setup, and then the practicing it, and then it actually being ready? Is there a strategy that you have there?
No, it's just trying to figure out how to perform my music in an exciting and engaging way on stage. When I create my music, I don't think about that. I don't think about performing, but at some point I start thinking about how I can translate this energy on stage, and how I can propose something exciting for the crowd, So I decide about what sound I will be kind of emphasize, what sound I will be interact with, and what can I use in order to entertain the crowd. In the end, we are entertainers. So thanks to the technology that is constantly evolving, it's interesting to develop new ways and new approaches to perform your music. And that's what I'm trying to do. Sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe with this new equipment or this new software or this new plugin, I can do this, and it could be exciting for the people. So yeah, it's more about that, about how to entertain the people. I don't know if in English it's a very exciting word, but yeah, how to entertain the people in the best possible way.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Because one of the things that I often think now, technology is great, and we've seen some amazing advances, but we do have a situation where now that a CDJ can beat match, it can key match, it can do a lot of the heavy lifting, turning someone potentially into more of a robot. And I love it being on the dance floor, even if I'm just listening to someone DJing. If there is a battle, if you can hear there's a bit of a battle with the timing, or there's something that they're wrestling with, they're on the edge a little bit more. And I also saw you mention that sometimes you kind of let go of the computer, and I think you said to build up the adrenaline, to look for the adrenaline. Is that marrying up with what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I love doing this. I love stop the computer and start jamming on a drum machine, play a few notes on the keyboards, and looking for this adrenaline. And I think generally something has to happen, either as a DJ or live performer. Something has to happen. You must figure out, you must understand and ask yourself why someone would pay a ticket for looking at you on stage. As a DJ, it can be like creating the perfect vibe at the perfect moment, or having the right selection, or doing something technically amazing. And as a live performer, it's like the connection with the crowd, something like this. But doing nothing and playing Beatport top 10 tracks on pre-synced decks is definitely not the best experience for a crowd. Let's be honest, So you must look for something special and exciting.
It's almost a paradox, because I think some people will they'll look for the safety net to not look bad necessarily if something goes wrong, but whilst simultaneously doing that, they're actually not bringing anything and not making themselves look bad, but they're kind of creating the thing that they're trying to avoid a little bit, because as you said, if it's just run of the mill, it's kind of vanilla, nobody's going to really be into it, your career's not going to grow. So it's being allowing yourself to be on the knife edge. That being said, has anything ever gone wrong for you when you go into the adrenaline zone, because you've got quite a lot of equipment there? I imagine there's the potential for problems.
Oh yeah. That one day I could write books with all the problems I had on stage, like all the technical issues and all that stuff, and sometimes even because of my own mistakes. That's probably one of the reasons why I stopped drinking, all that stuff. Because it's a good way to limit potential mistakes while being in front of people on stage. But yeah, a lot of technical issues. Of course, it's part of the fun. This is why it's called live.
Yeah, totally. I remember an absolute classic. We used to put on small parties on the south coast of England when I was way younger, and it was only a small party for about 80 people, and my co-promoter was DJing, and he played like this tune that was his big tune of the night, and he did the big Jesus pose and everything, and he stood backwards and kicked the plug out of the wall, and all the decks turned off, and he was just standing there like this, which was hilarious. But the thing that I really took away from it was that everybody cheered, had a laugh, the music went back on, and the party was better for it, instead of it being some terrible, embarrassing moment, So I think this kind of segues a little bit into going back into your creative process in the studio. How do you approach this? Because you mentioned pressure being something that can stop you, and having a fear of doing something wrong or being wrong with the music. I think it was Ken Robinson or maybe John Cleese who said, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never create anything original. So how do you allow yourself to flow and just explore without that side of your mind that comes in that may be judging and critical of what you're doing?
Just jamming and trying. But I'm always looking for happy accidents in the studio. This is why I love so much using vintage synthesizers, because they are not perfect. They are out of tune. They are like they are. Sometimes they're like a faulty component, something like this. And I'm looking for those accidents that you could use for just to surprise myself and to start something new and fresh. So usually I just like I run a sequencer on the RP2600, for instance. It's a great machine for creating accidents, because like a very slight modification, if you move a slider like 1 millimeter, can do a dramatically different sound. So it's a great way to create unexpected soundscapes. And the ARP sequencer or the 101 or just even sometimes using guitar pedals, and trying like out of control connections and signal chains until something happens.
I love what you just said, surprising yourself in the studio. So obviously you've got a musical background, not just professionally, but before that, I think you were playing piano from the age of 6. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
So is that the search for something random and the accident is a way of, you've obviously done a lot and heard a lot and created a lot of things. This gives you the new spark and something else to work with. Otherwise you might end up going down tried and tested roads. Would that be fair to suggest?
Yeah. I like to surprise myself, basically. Even regarding my piano background, I'm always trying to to escape from the rules I have learned. Uh, um, thanks God, I escaped the piano lessons before going to the actual academy and like learning like this, like rigid, rules and harmonic rules and all that stuff. But I'm always trying to escape this background. Like sometimes I even use plugins to kind of mess up what I'm playing in the keyboard in order to reach something else and to surprise myself again. Otherwise, I always do the same kind of chord progressions and stuff, and that's boring in the end.
Uh-huh.
When you listen to, I remember in the 80s, I was a big fan of Cure and The Cure, the band, And what I really liked is that they didn't know how to play their instruments, so it's always kind of harmonically weird and exciting, and that's what I'm looking for when playing the keyboard.
I love this. The sense that I'm getting from you here is the understanding of what you're looking for, whether it's the looking for the moment where you've got the spark of inspiration and it's time to create, or it's playing live and it's looking for the adrenaline, or it's searching for the happy accident or to do something different. You've clearly built up a number of strategies that are helping you in different environments to challenge yourself and keep things fresh and exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting point. Again, you're very good in like how you put everything together, because from the very beginning of my career, I've tried to understand who I am and who I can be. How can I say that? What could I propose as an artist to be different? For instance, when I read reviews about my music, journalists, they always describe me like this emotional electronic music producer, whatever it is. But that's my definition. And I've always been looking for a way to describe myself, like what could define myself as an artist. So I'm this emotional electronic music producer performing live. That's it. That's my definition now. And I like it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I like the way you talk about yourself as an artist as well, because I think that sometimes people get a little bit boxed in with like, I just make music and in this little box, but you see yourself as the, creativity and everything that you touch being a wider viewpoint, I guess is the word I'm looking for. So we've touched on the idea of avoiding pressure in the studio. So I know that's something that challenges your creativity. We've touched on looking for something new, because otherwise it can get stale if you do the same thing. Over all of your experience, are there any other things that you have blocked your creativity or have got in the way for you at any point?
Probably in the studio, what could be a problem now is the amount of options we have. I think that's an interesting topic. When I started producing music in the 90s, I started with a sampler hardware, a Kurzweil K2000, a synthesizer, a mixer, and an Atari computer. That's it. So I didn't have so many possibilities. I had to carefully select the sounds I will load in the sampler. I probably could use 2 or 3 sounds at the same time with the synth, and that's it. So it was you had to define a palette. You had to define a few sounds that would be your sound signature. And now when you open your DAW, you have like 10,000 plugins, gigabytes of samples, so many things. That's overwhelming. So that's probably one of the issue that I had to address recently. It's like, how can I select the right tools that I will be using, and to limit possibilities and to commit to something. Otherwise you just get lost. It's impossible for a human brain to deal with those sample packs. You know, there's so many sounds. Why would you need like 10,000 kick drums? It's impossible to work with this kind of, you know. So yeah, recently I decided to sort my hard drives, to sort my samples, back using hardware samplers. My MPC 2000, for instance, 10 kick drums, 5 claps, 10 hi-hats, and that's it. That's my palette. And if I need something else, then I'm gonna look for it, you know. But I think it's very important to limit your possibilities in the studio.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now that the sound palette, is that something you build for a project that you're going into, or you're happy with those now until a point that you're no longer happy with them, you get bored of them or feel it needs a shake up?
Oh yeah, I have like my sound signature. Like I've been using the same kick drum. That's a secret, but yeah, let's talk about that. I've been using
Take the lid off.
For 15 years now. One kick drum, all my tracks, one kick drum that I EQ, compress, all that stuff, and that's it. That's the right kick drum for my music, you know. And then on every project, I decide for like a specific palette with different kind of sounds. But it's very important for me to have this starting point defined and clear. Otherwise, it's, yeah, like we said, I could spend like weeks and weeks and weeks jamming, and nothing is going to happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And this is the thing, I speak about this quite a lot on the show, is that creativity thrives within boundaries. We don't want it to be too narrow, because otherwise you stifle the creativity. But as you said, with all the options are insane these days. And even with that small palette that you've got of kicks and claps and so on, with a bit of processing, you've already got amazing possibilities, but you get to improvise and create and innovate inside of that sort of box, I guess, that you've created.
Yeah. It's endless. I would be curious to know how it feels to be like a young producer now in 2021, just starting to learn your craft and facing those possibilities. What plugin I should use? There's so many possibilities. It's out of control. And the marketing departments, they are so good, you know, because even when you feel like, okay, now I have everything I need, you receive this newsletter with these new plugins, new compressor. You're like, oh, wow, maybe I could do something different with this compressor. But, you know, at some point when you have like, let's say 10 compressors in your folders, should be enough, you know, like it's... That's crazy.
Oh, and you're totally right, because this is what I do. I teach music producers, electronic music producers, how to overcome creative blocks. So a lot of the people that join our community are people who have maybe been trying to write music for sometimes 10 years plus and just can't get over the hurdle. And one of the number one things is overwhelm. It's overwhelm. It's too many options, no idea where to go, what to do, what plugins, samples to use. Yeah. And it kind of crushes them. And then the other one that you touched on perfectly was pressure. Like, what will people think? What will I think of myself if this doesn't turn out very well? So it's wonderful hearing someone as accomplished as you speaking about these things as well, and how you overcome them. It helped people massively.
I'm glad if I can help people, but that's interesting to see. It's a pattern. It's like it's the same problem all the time. So yeah, all those possibilities. That's crazy.
It certainly is. So when you've written your jam, how does the track progress? So you're jamming away, or you come in the studio with an idea, and then you say, okay, I've got maybe my first melody or theme or the musical idea. What's the process for you next?
The next process is printing ideas as much as I can, meaning if I have a nice melody with a bunch of effects, I already record it like this, EQ'd effects on a track, and that's a new base for the upcoming steps. I'm trying to take decisions and to commit. Very important. It's also an old school way of working, you know, like back in the days they were working with tape. So they had to print everything. You know, you don't leave open options. You're not like, oh, I will fix it later with a reverb and stuff like that. They had to record it with the effects and all that stuff. And that's what I'm trying to do. You know, like trying to take decisions and to finalize things as much as I can while working on the projects. So let's say if I can take an example, I'm gonna start with a melody, play it on the keyboard, play on the synths, add effects. Then I will try to create harmonies and a bass. Same thing again. Print it with effects and stuff like that. And I'm gonna add layers and layers and layers and layers. Kind of pre-mixed already with EQs and compression as I feel it. And at some point, I will feel like I have enough content, and I will start removing. Just trying to get the essence and the most important elements of what I did. Often ended up with 10, 11, 12 tracks maximum. And that's gonna be the finished product, you know.
And as you're taking things away, is that also forming the arrangement of the track, or are we still at the stage where we've kind of got a loop and then a bunch of building blocks to arrange? What would it look like when you'd subtracted all of the stuff that you feel is obscuring the idea?
Yeah. No, I work on the structure from the very beginning because the structure is part of the stories. When I started producing in like 25 years ago, I would work like with blocks and loops and then remove blocks and stuff like this. But I don't like this. It's like playing Lego, and I don't like to work like this. I prefer to define the structure from the very beginning and create the melody to kind of underline this structure, kind of connect with the structure of the song, and not the opposite.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if it's clear.
Yeah, no, it's perfectly clear. It's totally clear.
So it's part of the story. Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll get your jam. You'll come up with your idea. Let's say it's a melody in this example, and then you'll play it and variations of it and your effects and all of those things to get a flow, I guess, of the track would be a nice word for it. And then you start adding your layers under that to support the journey of the melody until you've got all of the pieces of the puzzle, I guess, at which point you then start taking things out to uncover, like, the groove is stronger actually if that thing isn't in there, and the melody shines through more if that thing isn't there, that sort of thing. Is that right?
Exactly. That's the perfect translation. Thank you. No, thank you. Yeah, it's exactly what I'm doing, you know. And I like this process of removing, you know, like subtracting things. And it's like cleaning your room, you know. You like removing all the useless elements and just get the essence, the important parts. So,
how do you know when it's finished?
When the manager calls and say, "Hey, you must deliver." Yeah, that's let's be honest, that's a painful process. Like, that's difficult. Usually that's my manager would define a deadline as like, hey, dude, mastering is waiting, you must deliver. And
let it go. I love it. So obviously you collaborate with your wife, Lizette. How does that change the working, your workflow in the studio, or does it?
It's a very organic process. It's really hard to put words on this process because it's so intuitive. Basically, I just work on an instrumental track, you know, and then I sent it to Lizette, who has a studio next to mine, and then she write vocals and lyrics and stuff, and then we put everything together again, and it's just like, you know, we don't jam together in the studio. It's more like separate processes. You know,
Right.
like
Okay.
work on the music, and she work on the lyrics, and then we put everything together. But that's very interesting to see how ideas bounce back between each of us. Very interesting, very intuitive.
Yeah, and is it just the vocals, or does she add other parts? Because I know when you perform, Lizette's also got keyboards and things as well, and it's a really dynamic performance between
Yeah,
both
yeah,
of
it's
you.
very dynamic. She's very good when it's about structures, song structures. Like usually when I when she works on vocals, she has a very clear picture of how she want to structure things like verse and chorus and stuff. So I have to work a lot on my own structure eventually. Yeah.
And how's about when you doing projects that aren't necessarily going to the dance floor? Because I know you've done things for fashion houses and you've done, non-dance music material. Do you find that flows more easily, or do you have to switch to a different mindset depending on where this piece of music is going?
No, I don't think about I don't think about the use of my music. Even like when I'm producing for the dance floor, I don't think about the dance floor. I think it's a trap because you have so many dance floors. Like for instance, a dance floor in UK is not the same than a dance floor in Spain or a dance floor in South America. So I don't think about that. And the same when I work for fashion or for for a soundtrack or something like this. I don't think about that. It's a
So
trap. Just don't think about the story again. Story is the most important.
right, okay, great. So also you're not thinking about how you might perform that particular piece.
No, that's an external process. It comes after when everything is finished. I'm like, okay, how can I translate it on stage in an exciting way? So that's a different process, totally different.
Uh-huh. And what about your mentors? Obviously, from right near the beginning, Laurent Garnier, what a great person to have in your corner. How influential was he? And have you had other mentors that have you've been able to learn from and gain valuable experience from in the past?
Before anything happened, my first mentor was a well-known French artist called Jean-Michel Jarre in the 80s.
Wow.
I was 9 years old, and I remember hearing for the first time on the radio, Rendezvous and Equinox, Oxygen, you know, and I was fascinated about those sounds. And from this age, I already knew what I wanted to do in my life. I wanted to do these sounds. That's how that's how everything started. So Jean-Michel Jarre, Kraftwerk, of course, Tangerine Dreams, all those bands from the 70s. And yeah, if you look to the studio around me, ARP 2600 is Jean-Michel Jarre, LK Syntex, Jean-Michel Jarre. Back there you have an eminent 310 is the string organ Jean-Michel Jarre used on Oxygen and Equinox. So it has also defined my sound in a way, and my melodic approach, definitely. And eventually, when I grew up, first big influences LFO, Aphex Twin, Warp music, huge influence, anything from Warp. But I remember buying frequencies by LFO in 92, 93, huge influence. And eventually Laurent Garnier, the French techno music ambassador, who I've got the chance to meet and to work with on his label of communication from between 99 to 2006, 2007.
And did you ever go in the studio with him at all?
No, I never worked with Laurent in the studio. What was very interesting, when we started touring together, I would spend the night next to him in the DJ booth trying to understand how he would connect with the crowd. And it was so exciting, being in the booth with Laurent Garnier, and it would teach me. It was like, you know what? I want to play this record soon, so I'm gonna have to play this one and this one before, because for instance we're in Liverpool, they like this kind of sound, so I need to prepare them to this track. And I've learned so much with him, like taking risks and understanding a crowd culturally, and yeah, that was crazy. I've learned so much. Thank you, Laurent.
That's fantastic. Have you learned anything from people in the studio, or is it just you hearing like people's music and drawing all of the influences that are defining you?
I've learned pretty much everything by myself. Uh, yeah, pre-internet area, so it was magazines, books, and a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, that's it. Because people don't think now. When I started as well, there was no YouTube. So I mean, there's again, we talk about the double-edged sword because it's good and it's bad. There's as much overwhelm on YouTube as there is valuable stuff, and so on and so forth. So again, your mind can explode going on there. That's if you're not distracted by your football team or whatever amazing marketing YouTuber putting something in front of you now. But yeah, people forget that there weren't those kind of aids, and it really was a complicated manual and a sample pack going into a hardware sampler. It was much more challenging, but I think enjoyable in some respects as well.
Absolutely. The idea was very important. You needed an idea, and then you will figure out how to do it, reading the manuals. Okay, so I'm gonna play the kick drum like this, and then the clap with this machine.
Yeah.
It was that hard. So you really had to commit to something, and to define a sound. Okay, my track is gonna be a clap and a kick drum and this bass and a pad, and that's it. And if I manage to make it happen, it's gonna be amazing, And it was so good. I really don't want to be nostalgic, but I really enjoyed this time. Like these challenges to make very basic things happen. It was amazing. I've learned so much.
You're obviously bringing some of it back in because you mentioned using the hardware samplers, for example. Yeah. And I remember the challenge of that. My first hardware sampler was a Yamaha A5000. And it was kind of funny because it was my first studio setup that I'd gone and bought, and the shop was like, oh, you've got to have one of these and one of these and one of these. And I think it was a couple of months later that Cubase bought out Hallion, which was the first soft sampler. And this thing I'd bought, like the price of it just went down to, like, it became almost worthless in people's eyes because of the convenience of a computer being able to do it with a big sampling window and all of these things. So is there a particular advantage that you find over working from the hardware samplers?
Once again, commitment. You must carefully select the sound you're using, because you must load the sounds in the sampler, and it's not as easy as a software sampler. Definitely, it's much more difficult and tedious. So you must commit to something. And for some reason, the sound, like a few months ago, I was working on a project and the beat was not, I don't want to mention the software I was using, but it was not good, And then I uploaded these exact same samples in my MPC 2000, and it was amazing. It was just like in your face. The sound was great. So maybe it's because of the converters, maybe it's because of the, I don't know, some kind of internal distortion, whatever, but it was just the right sound. So I'm definitely back to hardware samplers now. Akai MPC 2000, I just ordered Akai S3000, arriving today. And it's just also more fun, instead of using a mouse, you have like a dedicated device, dedicated to something, and I really like it.
So with that in mind, the various pieces of gear and things you've got there that you're kind of jamming out with, when do you decide it's a new piece that's coming in the studio? Because you've got this fully you know, I'm looking at it now in the background. It's beautiful. There's probably stuff I can't even see. Is there a moment where you feel you need something for inspiration? We obviously talked about bringing things into the live performance, but I'm wondering now, obviously something you can't use might get in the way of creative flow. So is there any kind of strategy there? You run out of, you want something new for inspiration, or is it the marketing people who get you?
No, there is no strategy. It's basically it's a disease. You know, like, you know, when I enter this room, I'm always like, oh man, something is wrong with you. You really have to. And I'm trying to avoid the trap of collecting things, but yeah, I have to face reality. Reality is that, I just love synthesizers and machines, and I just love being hanging out with those machines. And it's like a disease. Of course, I don't need all that stuff for producing music. You know, I could do the same things with just a few keyboards. And for some reason I cannot sell anything. I can't. I sold like a few guitar pedals and stuff like that, and it's so painful all the time, like, oh, but one day I might need it. So yeah, it's a disease. Don't do that.
Don't do it.
It's a bad addiction.
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second, like a one piece of advice just to wrap things up. But I do have one more question just about the gear and the things that you use. I know that you have Ableton in your setup on stage. Is that the DAW you use in the studio as well?
No, in the studio I use both Ableton and Logic Pro. Usually I start the project in Ableton, just having fun, playing with loops, you know, like... I like how fun is Ableton. You know, you can add effects and then re-record on a different track and then change the BPM, and it's just fun. And at some point, I just export everything and switch to Logic. For some reason, it's easier for me to mix down and to interface my hardware equipment, my effects with Logic. I really like the environment page. I feel more comfortable finalizing within Logic.
Right. So Ableton is like one of your creative tools for inspiration. It's and I love that this idea of using specific things for a certain task that you talk about as well. So that isn't where the piece of music is going to get finished and fully arranged. It's a tool, and there are certain aspects of it that you love that you'll use, just like you might a synthesizer, for example.
Exactly. Ableton is an amazing sketch pad, like a notebook. You just record raw ideas and stuff. And then Logic is more I don't know, I feel more comfortable with the layout generally. The mixer, the audio mixer is really nice. It's like an actual mixer. You know, you can see your inserts and it's clear, and I just feel more comfortable. The rest goes for the job.
So we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you. It's been absolutely fantastic hearing some particular highlights for me. You talking about how you've defined your sound as an artist, and I can hear about the machines and the fact that hanging out with the machines was such a beautiful phrase as well. But we've also touched on the things from pressure and keeping the spark alive in the studio and in performing and all of these. It's been super valuable. Thank you. So going back to the idea of the younger producers now, if you had like a single piece of advice, maybe it would be if you were starting out now and you were talking to a young version of yourself coming into this world, if there was one thing that you would say to a producer who's just starting their journey out, what would it be?
One thing, just one. That's difficult.
If you've got just more, one. You can go with more, because I realise I'm making life difficult by giving you one. So if you want to do a couple, that's totally cool.
No, if it's only one, I would say don't be afraid to be different. And it's very important, because being different is the only way to be unique. But accepting the fact you're different is also very difficult nowadays. Everything is very formatted. When you go to Beatport, everything is formatted into genres and categories and stuff. And I think it's very difficult for a young artist to accept he has to be himself. It's very difficult. So I think it's the most important. And there are so many music producers nowadays, so many. It's out of control. That if you're not different, if you're not yourself, it's not gonna work.
It's that old saying, right? I can't understand why I'm not successful. My music sounds the same as everybody else's.
No, yeah, that's you must figure out how you can stand out within this crowd of music producers and DJs and stuff, and you must manage to be different. And I think that being yourself is the best way to be different.
Amazing. And I'll tie.
Yeah, sorry.
I was just gonna say I'll tie it in right to something you said at the start, which I think has got to underline all of this, which is the commitment and the discipline to show up every day.
Exactly. Work hard, commitments, take decisions for yourself to work with a very limited amount of plugins and equipment, and force yourself to finalize something with those options.
Yeah, amazing. Look, thank you very much. What can we expect from you coming up, though? Let's dive into that. What's cooking? Are we going to get some more videos, more music? What's happening?
I've been working on a lot of projects recently, because basically, for the first time of my life, I have quality studio time without any touring and stuff. So I've been working on an album with Lizette, like something different, songs, like it's like more pop in a way. I've been working on a sound pack for Loop Masters.
Oh wow!
You're gonna have more kick drums.
Yeah.
And claps and stuff. I did a lot of remixes. I'm just releasing a remix for Harry Romero today on Crosstown Rebels.
Oh wow!
Lot of remixes, and maybe a new album next year. So yeah, a lot of things, really a lot of things. And I think that's thanks to this pandemic. That's the first time in my career that I managed to spend enough time in the studio, facing myself, and doing what I really want for the very first time.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I'm excited to hear all of your projects coming out. As I said, I'm a huge fan of your music, of watching your performances, and even like those studio jams. I think for anyone who's struggling to get inspired, just watch one. You can't help but to get that spark to want to make something yourself watching those. So absolutely brilliant. Huge thank you once again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Always my pleasure. Thank you so much. And I wish you a great to all the students also, because you're also a great success in this beautiful industry and in their art.
Legend. Thank you so much. And listen, I'm going to definitely hook you in and get you back in again in the future, because I know everything's always evolving and it's a big journey for you, and there's going to be a million more things that we can talk about. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you. Whenever you like. My pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.